I started my life in quite a traditional way. I was very clever at school, so I always came top. I was extremely well educated. I went to Cambridge University, and I was on track to become a teacher, a lawyer, or a civil servant. I didn't know what a civil servant was, so that went out of the window. I spent a week in a court and couldn't understand what was going on and found it really boring, so I didn't want to be a lawyer, and so I became a teacher. And that was probably the beginning of my game changing, because I arrived in schools and I discovered that they didn't seem to work the way I thought they should. So I thought school was all about kids, and I found myself in an environment that seemed to me too much about the adults, about the teachers. And for whatever reason, I was somewhat rebellious and I just couldn't fit there in the long term. I couldn't see my career there. And so I started to veer off in another direction. And I realized from that point that I wanted to do things differently. I desperately needed to do things differently for my own satisfaction. And then there was another thing that came in as well. So that was the positive trigger, if you like, this desire to be different. And the negative trigger was that when I was 30 years old, my sister died of a brain tumor. And I remember when I first heard that she was really sick and she was about to have an operation, and the words that went through my mind when I was told on the phone was, things like that don't happen to people like us. So up until that moment, my life had been really protected and I just felt like I could do whatever I wanted. And suddenly it felt like the whole thing, the whole foundation on which I lived, which was that you're healthy and you go to the doctor and the doctor can help you if something goes wrong. This kind of very secure life I lived in just collapsed overnight. And over the next 18 or so months that she was sick and eventually died, it caused a really deep questioning within me of how we live and of the fact that I was so unprepared actually for a real life event to happen. And the third thing that really probably pushed me to be a game changer was the 10 years I spent interviewing children and listening to their questions. I was working for the BBC, for BBC Radio, and I traveled all over the world and all over the UK where I came from, listening to children talking and interviewing them. And they asked questions over and over again about life. And I realized that I couldn't answer those questions. And I actually didn't know who to go to find the answers. And so what that led to inside me was an enormous desire to find answers to the big questions about life and to actually do things differently.